Police detain black man at airport, then cry upon learning the truth. Dr. Marcus Johnson was in a hurry at Reagan National Airport when security officers approached him. His luggage had caught the attention of the detectives, and now he found himself handcuffed in front of hundreds of passengers who stopped to film with their phones. Officers Richard Miller and Paul Thompson firmly escorted him toward the interrogation room, completely ignoring his desperate pleas that he had an urgent commitment he couldn't miss. "Please, I need to board this flight," Marcus begged, his words echoing down the hallway as people whispered and pointed. "You don't understand. People are waiting for me." "Everyone's in a hurry here, pal," Richard replied indifferently, adjusting the handcuffs. "But transporting suspicious material is a serious crime." "What suspicious material?" Marcus tried to stay calm, but desperation crept into his voice. "I'm a doctor. I have all the documents." Paul rolled his eyes. "How many times have we heard that one, huh, Richard? Everyone's a doctor, lawyer, or businessman when they're caught with something strange in their luggage." In the interrogation room, Marcus was instructed to sit on a cold metal chair while the officers began examining his bag with rubber gloves. The atmosphere was tense, lit only by a flickering fluorescent light. "Look what we have here," Richard said, carefully pulling out a small, intricately decorated wooden urn. "Care to explain what this is?" Marcus swallowed hard, his hands trembling. "It's ashes, but not what you're thinking. I can explain everything if you just give me a chance." "Ashes of what?" Paul asked suspiciously. "And why transport this without properly declaring it?" "It's complicated." Marcus hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "They're the ashes of a child who was very special to me. I was returning from a medical mission in Haiti when I got the news she had passed. The family asked me to bring her remains back to the United States." The two officers exchanged skeptical glances. "Pretty convenient story," Richard remarked. "Every smuggler has a sob story ready. Let's see what kind of documentation you've got." Marcus nodded toward his briefcase. "My documents are in the black folder. I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, specialized in pediatrics, and have worked in humanitarian missions for 15 years. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out as we're just starting. Now, back to the story." Paul opened the folder and found diplomas, certificates, and a sealed letter with an official stamp, but his expression remained doubtful. "Anyone can fake documents these days," he muttered, though something in his tone suggested he was starting to question his own suspicions. "Please," Marcus leaned forward, his eyes burning with urgency. "Call Pennsylvania General Hospital. Ask for Dr. Frederick Davis, he's my supervisor. He can confirm everything." Richard sighed impatiently. "We don't have time to check everyone's story who comes through here. You'll have to wait for the full protocol." "But you don't understand." Marcus stood abruptly, making the officers instinctively reach for their gear. "The family is gathered today for the funeral. If I don't arrive with these ashes, they won't be able to hold the ceremony. This child, she meant everything to them." "Sit down," Paul ordered, pointing at the chair. "And stop trying to manipulate us with dramatic stories." Marcus obeyed, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath before speaking again. "Do you want to know the whole truth? Fine. This child wasn't just any child to me. She was the daughter of the family who saved my life when I was little." Richard crossed his arms but said nothing, signaling for Marcus to continue. "I grew up in North Philly in Philadelphia. My mother was a housekeeper, and my father had abandoned us when I was 7. We had nothing, absolutely nothing." Marcus paused, his words heavy with emotion. "When I was 12, I got terribly sick with a high fever. My mother didn't have money to take me to a doctor. I was collapsing on the street when the foster family found me." Paul sat in a nearby chair, his posture slightly less defensive. "Mrs. Helen and Mr. Joseph took me to their home, called a private doctor, and paid for all my treatment. They found out I had severe pneumonia. If they hadn't helped me, I wouldn't be here today." "And then?" Richard asked, trying to keep his tone professional, though his curiosity was clear. "Then they found out I was a good student. Really good, actually. Even though I went to a rundown public school, I had the best grades in my class. Mrs. Helen made me an offer that changed my life forever. Marcus paused, wiping a tear that stubbornly formed in the corner of his eye. She said if I kept studying and maintained good grades, they'd pay for my education until I graduated from college. Not just high school, but university too. The two agents stayed silent, absorbing the information. I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was a joke or that they'd give up after a few months. But they kept their promise. They paid for my private school, prep courses, medical school, everything. And the child? Paul asked, his voice softer now. Bethany was their youngest daughter. She was born when I was in my second year of college. Ever since she was little, she called me Uncle Doctor because she knew I was studying medicine. She always said that when she grew up, she'd work with me to help other kids. Marcus smiled sadly. For the last 15 years, every time I came back from a medical mission, she was the first person I'd visit. Bethany loved hearing my stories about the places I'd worked, the children I'd helped. Richard stepped closer to the table where the documents lay. What happened to her? 3 months ago, I was in Haiti working on a vaccination campaign in rural areas. I got a call from Mrs. Helen telling me Bethany had been hospitalized with a rare blood disease. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. I cancelled everything and rushed back to the United States. I spent 2 months in the hospital with her, trying every possible treatment. I got the best specialists in the country to examine her. And did it work? Paul asked, though Marcus's expression already told him the answer. For a few weeks, yes. She improved a lot, so much that the doctors said I could go back to Haiti to finish my mission. Bethany insisted I go, said she'd be fine and that she wanted me to keep helping other kids. Marcus took a deep breath before continuing. 2 weeks after I went back to the Caribbean, I got another call. The disease had come back much stronger. By the time I got a flight back, it was too late to say goodbye. The agents remained in respectful silence for a moment. The family called and asked me to bring her ashes back to the United States. They wanted her cremated there because it was where she spent her last conscious moments, but they wanted me to bring her home. Richard looked at the urn on the table with a completely different expression. Why didn't they do this through official channels? Because the bureaucratic procedures would take weeks or even months, and today is Bethany's birthday. The family wanted to hold a special ceremony today, on the day she would have turned 22. Paul picked up the sealed letter on the table. Can I open this? Marcus nodded. It's a letter Bethany herself wrote to me before she passed. The family found it among her belongings and decided I should read it during the ceremony. Paul carefully opened the envelope and began reading silently. As his eyes moved down the lines, his expression gradually changed. Richard, you need to read this, said Paul, handing the letter to his colleague. Richard read quickly, then looked at Marcus with an expression of surprise and what seemed like shame. She wrote about you here, says you were the greatest inspiration of her life. She also mentions she was saving money to open a free clinic in the neighborhood where you grew up, Paul added, and that she wanted you to be the medical director. Marcus closed his eyes, fighting back tears. That was the surprise she was preparing for me. She had managed to convince some family friends who were business owners to invest in the project. Everything was practically settled. And now? Richard asked. Now the family has decided to continue the project in her memory. It's part of what we'll discuss after today's ceremony. The two agents exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Dr. Marcus, Paul began hesitantly, we need to run some routine checks, but... At that moment, the door opened, and the agent's supervisor entered, Captain Charles Wilson, a man in his early 50s with a serious expression. What's the situation here? He asked, looking directly at Marcus. Captain, Richard said, you might want to take a look at these documents. Charles took the papers and examined them carefully. Then he looked at the urn. Unauthorized transport of human remains? He asked. Actually, sir, Paul interjected, the situation is more complicated than we initially thought. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Charles listened silently as Paul summarized Marcus's story. When he finished, the captain remained thoughtful for a few moments. Doctor, Marcus, why didn't you properly declare the contents of your luggage at check-in? Captain, I tried, Marcus replied, but the airline employee told me I'd need special documentation that takes days to process. She suggested I declare it as a personal item of sentimental value so I could board today. And you followed that improper advice, Charles concluded. Yes, sir. I know it was a mistake, but I was desperate. The ceremony is today, and the family has been waiting 3 months for this moment. Charles turned to his subordinates. Did you verify his medical documents? We haven't had time yet, Captain, Richard admitted. Then do it now, and call the hospital he mentioned. While the agents conducted their checks, Charles sat across from Marcus. Doctor, even if your story is true, there are protocols to follow. Improper transport of biological material is a serious matter. I understand completely, Captain, but I didn't realize there would be so much red tape. In 15 years of medical travel, I've never faced a situation like this. Tell me more about your work, Charles asked, genuinely interested. Marcus took a deep breath. I work mostly with humanitarian organizations in Caribbean countries. My specialty is pediatrics, but in field missions, you end up doing a bit of everything. I've worked in refugee camps, regions with disease outbreaks and conflict zones. And why did you choose this kind of work? Because of Bethany, actually. When she was little, she always asked me about the children I treated. She said she wanted me to save as many kids around the world as possible to make up for the fact that I was saved when I was young. Charles nodded slowly. A wise girl. She really was. She always said our lives only have meaning when we use them to help others. She's the one who convinced me to leave a well-paying job at a private hospital to dedicate myself fully to humanitarian missions. At that moment, Richard returned with a phone in his hand. Captain, I called the hospital. They confirmed everything. Dr. Frederick Davis wants to speak with you. Charles took the phone. Dr. Frederick, this is Captain Charles Wilson from Airport Security. Yes, we have Dr. Marcus Johnson here. I see. Yes, of course. The conversation lasted a few minutes, during which Charles took several notes. Thank you, Doctor. That clears up a lot, he said before hanging up. So? Paul asked. Dr. Frederick confirmed everything. He even told me a few things Dr. Marcus didn't mention. Charles turned to Marcus. Why didn't you tell us you founded a free clinic in the neighborhood where you grew up? Marcus shrugged. I didn't think it was relevant to the current situation. And that you treat around 500 children a month without charging anything? Captain, that doesn't change the fact that I made a mistake with the documentation. Charles smiled for the first time since entering the room. No, it doesn't, but it changes how we'll handle it. He addressed the officers. You'll escort Dr. Marcus to the boarding gate. We'll sort out the documentation issue later, but he's not missing this flight. Richard looked surprised. Captain, what about protocol? Protocol also allows exceptions for humanitarian cases, and this clearly is one. Marcus stood quickly. Thank you, Captain. Thank you so much. But there's one condition, Charles added. You must commit to sorting out all the documentation when you return, and I want you to visit us to discuss how we can improve our procedures for cases like this. Of course, absolutely. As they hurried through the airport toward the boarding gate, Paul seemed thoughtful. Dr. Marcus, can I ask you a personal question? Of course. How do you keep hope after seeing so much suffering in the world? Marcus smiled sadly. Bethany taught me that every life we manage to save or improve makes all the difference. She used to say we shouldn't measure our success by what we couldn't do, but by what we could. She really was special, Richard remarked. She was. And the clinic project she planned will help many other kids like I once was. They reached the gate just as the final boarding call was being made. Dr. Marcus, Paul said, if it's not too much trouble, when you return, I'd like to visit your clinic. It'd be an honor to have you there, Marcus replied, shaking both officers' hands. And Doctor, Richard added, I'm truly sorry for how we treated you at first. It wasn't right. Marcus shook his head. You were just doing your job. I should have been better prepared with the documentation. As Marcus boarded the plane, the two officers stood watching from the airport window. Did you notice how we misjudged him from the start? Paul asked. I did, Richard admitted. We see a well-dressed black man with something suspicious in his luggage and immediately assume the worst. It's a problem we need to work on. I agree. Maybe we should propose training on this for the whole team. During the flight to Philadelphia, Marcus held carefully the urn with Bethany's ashes. He reread the letter she had written, and every word brought both pain and inspiration. "Uncle Doctor," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I left before seeing our project come to life. But please, don't give up. There are so many children who need you, just as you needed my family when you were little. Promise me you'll keep saving lives. Promise you'll open our clinic. I'll always be cheering for you wherever I am. With love, your niece at heart, Bethany." When the plane landed in Philadelphia, Marcus was greeted at the airport by the Foster family. Mrs. Helen, now with graying hair but the same warm smile as always, hugged him tightly. "You brought our girl home," she said, tears in her eyes. "Just as I promised," Marcus replied. Mr. Joseph, older but still dignified, firmly shook Marcus's hand. "Bethany would be proud to know you faced all that hardship to keep your word." "She would have done the same for any of us," Marcus said. The ceremony was held in the backyard of the house where Marcus had been taken in so many years ago. Friends, neighbors, and some of the many children Marcus had treated for free at his clinic gathered to honor Bethany. During the ceremony, Marcus read Bethany's letter aloud. There wasn't a single person present who wasn't moved. "Bethany believed our mission in life is to give back the kindness we've received," Marcus said. "She planned a clinic that will be a symbol of that philosophy, and we will build it." After the ceremony, the family gathered in the living room to discuss the details of the clinic project. "Bethany secured donations from 3 local business owners," Mrs. Helen explained. "The land has already been chosen in the area where you grew up. She wanted it there because she knew that's where the need is greatest," added Mr. Joseph. "And she insisted you be the medical director," said Mary, Bethany's older sister. "She said no one would understand those children's reality better than you." Marcus held the urn with Bethany's ashes. "I accept, but on one condition. I want the clinic to be named the Bethany Foster Medical Center. She deserves to have her name remembered for all the lives we'll save there." Everyone agreed, deeply moved. 2 weeks later, Marcus received an unexpected call from Reagan National Airport. It was Officer Paul. "Dr. Marcus, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the hospital." "Of course not. How are you?" "Good, thank you. Actually, I'm calling for 2 reasons. First, to ask how the ceremony went." Marcus told him about the ceremony and the plans for the clinic. "That's wonderful. And the second thing is, we spoke with the captain, and we're proposing unconscious bias training for our entire team. We'd love for you to come speak to us about your experience." "It would be my pleasure," Marcus replied. "But why the sudden interest?" "Because we realized we treated you unfairly, based on nothing but bias. And if it happened to you, imagine how many others we've overlooked." "That's a very important initiative, Paul. And there's one more thing. My son is finishing high school and has always dreamed of being a doctor. Would it be possible for him to intern at your clinic? Of course, once Bethany's clinic is ready, he'll be welcome." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. 3 months later, the construction of the clinic was in full swing. Marcus had secured more donors and volunteers, including several doctors who offered to work for free a few hours each week. During one of his visits to the construction site, Marcus received a call from Captain Charles. "Dr. Marcus, I have a proposal for you." "I'm listening." "We'd like to establish an official partnership between the airport and your clinic. We're thinking of creating a program where airport employees could volunteer there." "That would be fantastic. But why?" "Because your story taught us a lot about snap judgments and the value of humanitarian work. We want our team to learn that firsthand. I'm sure Bethany would be thrilled with this partnership." On the day of the clinic's grand opening, 6 months after that tense encounter at the airport, a crowd gathered for the ceremony. Alongside the Foster family and the local community, Captain Charles, officers Paul and Richard, and over 20 airport employees who had volunteered to help were in attendance. This clinic exists because of a girl who believed in the power of human kindness. Marcus said during his inauguration speech. Bethany taught us that when we reach out to help someone, we create a chain of good that never ends. Paul, who was in the audience with his 17-year-old son, wiped a tear from his eye. "Dad, this is why I want to be a doctor," the young man whispered. "To be part of that chain." Richard, standing nearby, smiled. "And that's exactly why we're going to help you make it happen." During the celebration, Mrs. Helen approached Marcus. "Do you know what moves me the most about all this?" she asked. "What?" "That day at the airport, which started so badly, ended up being the beginning of something far greater than Bethany ever imagined." "How so?" "She planned a clinic to help underprivileged children. But what happened turned into a network of people from different backgrounds working together for a common goal. That's far more powerful." Marcus looked around and saw airport staff helping distribute snacks, security officers playing with kids from the community, and his adoptive son, Paul Jr., already chatting excitedly with other young people interested in medicine. "You're right. Bethany was always more visionary than any of us." 2 years later, the Bethany Foster Clinic had become a benchmark for free pediatric care. Over 1,000 children had been treated, and the airport's volunteer program had expanded to include other hospitals in the area. Paul, who now worked part-time at the clinic alongside his airport duties, had completely changed his perspective on prejudice and snap judgments. "You know, Dr. Marcus," he said one afternoon while helping at the clinic, "my son is starting medical school next year, and he always says it was that day at the airport that set the course of his life." "How so?" "He saw how we treated you at first and was ashamed. He decided he wanted to be a doctor to prove not everyone judges others by appearances." Marcus smiled. "And where's he studying?" "At the University of Pennsylvania, just like you. He says he wants to follow in your footsteps." "Well, tell him he'll always have a place here for his residency." Richard, who had also become a regular volunteer, joined the conversation. "Dr. Marcus, can I tell you something? That day changed my life too." "How?" "I had prejudices I didn't even realize I carried. After working here, I understood how wrong my automatic judgments were. Now I'm the one who leads unconscious bias training at the airport. And the results? They've completely changed how our team handles suspicious situations. We still do our security work, but with much more humanity and respect. That night, after all the volunteers had left, Marcus stayed alone in the clinic organizing some documents. He looked at the portrait of Bethany hanging on the main wall. "Thank you, Bethany," he said softly. "You managed to create something far greater than any of us imagined." He opened the desk drawer and took out the letter she had written. Even after 2 years, he still reread it whenever he needed inspiration. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was an international call. "Dr. Marcus, this is Dr. John Baker from the Dominican Republic. We've heard about the fantastic work you're doing there in the United States." "Thank you, Doctor. How can I help you?" "We're trying to set up a similar project here. Would it be possible for you to come help us implement the Bethany Foster Clinic model?" Marcus smiled, looking again at Bethany's portrait. "Of course, Doctor. Bethany always said kindness knows no borders." "Perfect. And Doctor, just out of curiosity, how did you manage to involve airport staff in the project? I found that very interesting." "It's a long story," Marcus replied. "But in short, sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes if we know how to turn misunderstanding into understanding." 3 months later, Marcus was in the Dominican Republic helping to implement the second Bethany Foster Clinic. Paul and Richard had managed to take time off to join him and help with the organization. "I never imagined I'd be in the Caribbean helping to set up a clinic," said Paul as he painted one of the walls. "Me neither," Richard agreed. "But you know what's most amazing? It all started with us doing the exact opposite of what we're doing now." "How so?" "That day at the airport we were dividing, judging, creating barriers. Today, we're here building bridges and bringing people together." Marcus, who was listening while organizing medical supplies, walked over to them. "You know, that's exactly what Bethany wrote in her letter." "What did she write?" "That good people in the world just need an opportunity to show their kindness. Sometimes they just don't know how." Paul stopped painting for a moment. Dr. Marcus, can I ask something I've always wondered? Of course. Were you ever angry with us? That day, I mean. Marcus thought for a moment before answering. Do you want the honest answer? We do. I was angry, yes, very. But then I understood you were acting based on what you knew, on your experiences. Anger wasn't going to change that. Only education and example could. And that's why you let us come work at the clinic, said Richard. Exactly. Bethany always said it's no use fighting darkness. It's better to light a candle. That evening, the three of them sat on the porch of the house where they were staying, watching the sunset over the Atlantic Ocean. You know what I've learned most these past 2 years, said Paul. What? That we judge people in seconds based on appearance, clothes, skin color. But behind every person is a whole story we don't know. Richard nodded. And when we stop judging and start listening, we discover incredible stories, like Dr. Marcus's. Or like yours, Marcus added. 2 men who had the humility to admit their mistakes and the courage to change. Paul smiled. My son always says he wants to be like you when he grows up, but I tell him he already is. He's learning to see people by their hearts, not their looks. And my daughter, said Richard, who's studying nursing now, says she wants to work in humanitarian missions. She says she was inspired by Bethany's story. Marcus was moved. You know, I'm sure Bethany is happy seeing all this. She always said that a good deed creates more good deeds like ripples in a pond. And those ripples reached all the way here to the Caribbean, Paul observed. And they'll reach many other places, Richard added. When they returned to the United States, a surprise awaited them. The story of the Bethany Foster Clinic had caught the attention of the national media, and several other cities wanted to replicate the model. Dr. Marcus, Mrs. Helen said during a meeting at the clinic, we've received proposals from 15 different cities. How are we going to manage this? We'll train local teams, he replied. And our volunteers from the airport can help organize the logistics. Paul, who now coordinated the volunteer program, was excited. We can create a national network of Bethany Foster clinics, and an international one too, Richard added. The Dominican Republic was just the beginning. 2 years after that conversation, there were 23 Bethany Foster clinics spread across the United States, and 5 more in other Caribbean countries. Over 500 airport employees from across the country had participated in bias training and become volunteers in similar projects. Paul Jr., now in his 3rd year of medical school, coordinated a program where medical students interned at the clinics during their breaks. Dad, he said to Paul during one of his visits to the original clinic, sometimes I think how different things would be if you hadn't stopped Dr. Marcus that day. Why? Because maybe none of this would exist. The clinic might be here, but not this whole network of people working together. Paul thought about it. You know, son, I think Bethany planned all this in some way. How so? She knew Dr. Marcus always faced hardships for being black, even as a doctor. Maybe she knew he'd go through something like that and wanted it to turn into something positive. Richard, who was listening, stepped closer. You know what I think? She chose the right people to change. We were exactly the kind of people who needed to learn that lesson. And Dr. Marcus was exactly the kind of person who could teach us, Paul finished. Marcus, who had just arrived and heard the end of the conversation, smiled. You're giving Bethany too much credit. She was wise but not a fortune teller. Oh, Doctor, Paul Jr. said, don't you believe some things happen for a reason? I believe people make things happen for a reason, Marcus replied. You two could have held on to the same prejudices. I could have held on to resentment. But we all chose to turn that bad experience into something good. And Bethany? Richard asked. Bethany gave us the tools. The rest was up to us. That afternoon, during clinic hours, a family arrived with an 8-year-old girl who had suffered burns. Marcus examined her carefully. She'll be just fine, he told the mother. We'll take good care of her. As he treated the girl, she asked, Doctor, why do you help people for free? Marcus smiled. Because once, a very special girl taught me that when you help someone, you're helping yourself too. How? Because it makes you happy inside, and that happiness spreads to others. The girl thought for a moment. So when I grow up, can I help people too to be happy inside? If you want, Marcus replied. I do. Can I help here at the clinic? Marcus looked at Paul and Richard, who watched the scene with emotion. Of course you can. When you're older, there'll always be a place for you here. After the family left, the three of them stood in silence for a while. That's it, Paul finally said. What? Asked Marcus. That's how the chain keeps going. One child at a time, one family at a time, one person at a time. Richard nodded. And it all started with a girl who believed in the power of kindness and a man who chose to honor her memory in the best way possible. And two security agents who had the humility to admit when they were wrong, Marcus added. Paul smiled. My son always says this is the most beautiful story he knows. Not because it has a happy ending, but because it shows that anyone can change and make a difference. And because it shows that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes, Richard said. Marcus looked around the busy clinic, with volunteers of all ages and backgrounds working together, children playing in the waiting room, doctors caring for patients with warmth. Do you know what Bethany would say if she saw all this? What? The two asked in unison. That it was worth believing in people's kindness. 5 years after that tense encounter at Reagan National Airport, the Bethany Foster Clinics had grown into an international network with over 50 locations in 12 countries. Paul had become the national coordinator for the volunteer program, Richard ran the Bias Training Institute, and Paul Jr. was graduating from medical school with a specialization in pediatrics. During the celebration of the 5th anniversary of the first clinic, hundreds of people gathered in the same backyard where the memorial ceremony for Bethany had been held. When I think about everything that's happened, Marcus said during his speech, I remember a phrase Bethany used to repeat, good people are everywhere. Sometimes they just need an opportunity to show their kindness. He looked at Paul and Richard, who sat in the front row with their families. These two men taught me a valuable lesson that day at the airport. They showed me that judging people by appearances is a mistake we can all make, but recognizing that mistake and working to correct it is what makes us truly human. Paul stood up. Dr. Marcus, may I say something? Of course. I want to publicly thank you for giving us the chance to redeem ourselves. You could have held a grudge, filed a formal complaint, or ignored us when we offered to help, but you chose to give us an opportunity. Richard also stood, and for teaching us that prejudice isn't an irreversible flaw, it's something that can be worked on, changed, and overcome. Today, we're better people because of that lesson. Mrs. Helen, now 72 but still active in managing the clinics, asked to speak. My daughter Bethany always said she wanted her legacy measured not by what she achieved in life, but by what her memory would inspire others to achieve. Looking at all this today, I know she'd be immensely proud. Paul Jr., now doing his residency at the original clinic, also spoke. I was 15 when all this started. I watched my dad and Uncle Richard go through a complete transformation. I learned it's never too late to change, never too late to be a better person. Mary, Bethany's sister, who had become the administrative director of the clinic network, concluded, Bethany always believed one person could change the world if they touched the right hearts at the right time. Today, we see she was right. When the celebration ended and everyone had left, Marcus stood alone in the backyard where it all began. He held Bethany's original letter in his hand, now yellowed with age, but still perfectly legible. As he reread her words for the 100th time, he felt a deep gratitude, not just for the chance to honor her memory, but for all the lives touched and transformed along the way. His phone rang. It was a video call from the Dominican Republic. Dr. Marcus, said Dr. John Baker enthusiastically, we have wonderful news. I'm listening. The Dominican government has decided to adopt the Bethany Foster Clinics model as a national public policy. We'll implement one unit on each of the 9 inhabited islands. Marcus smiled, gazing at the starry sky. Bethany would be so happy to know her idea has gone this far. And there's more. Representatives from other Caribbean countries want to learn about the model. We're organizing an international conference on humanitarian medicine and social inclusion. After ending the call, Marcus walked to the small garden planted in Bethany's memory. At its center stood a simple plaque with the words, "Bethany Foster believed in the goodness of people." "Thank you, Bethany," he said softly, "for believing that people like Paul and Richard could change, for believing that people like me could make a difference, and most of all, for believing that love and kindness always triumph over prejudice and fear." He carefully folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. Tomorrow would be another day at the clinic, another day of transforming lives, another day proving Bethany was right about human nature. As he walked toward his car, his phone rang again. It was Paul. "Dr. Marcus, sorry to call so late. My son just phoned me from his shift. Did something happen? Something wonderful happened. He saved a child's life today, and you know what he told me?" "What?" "That he felt as if Bethany were guiding his hands during the surgery." Marcus smiled, tears in his eyes. "She was, Paul. She's in every life we save, in every prejudice we overcome, in every time we choose to see the best in people instead of the worst." "Dr. Marcus?" "Yes." "Thank you for teaching us that. Thank you for turning the worst day of our professional lives into the first day of our lives as better people." After hanging up, Marcus looked once more at the house where he'd been welcomed so many years ago, where Bethany had grown up dreaming of changing the world, where now a training center for volunteers from across the country stood. He started the car and drove off, knowing the next day would bring more lives to save, more people to inspire, more chances to prove Bethany was right. Good people are everywhere. Sometimes they just need an opportunity to show their kindness. And it had all started with a misunderstanding at an airport, two people willing to admit their mistakes, and a young woman who, though no longer with them, kept transforming lives through the power of her unshakable belief in the goodness of people. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you have a similar experience to share, leave us a heartfelt comment. Do you think Paul and Richard made the right decision? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other moving stories like this one.